If there's anything that I've learned in my limited 21 years on this planet, it's that businesses follow the money. As much as your favorite company or corporation might seem to care about their fans' interests and desires, their end goal is always to make a profit, and the largest profit possible. This is true for nearly every type of medium out there. Writers of popular novel series have been able to marinate in countless examples of ill-received film adaptations that are built to sell merchandise. Filmmakers have created several shallow reboots of classic iconic franchises that are designed to attract any casual passerby who recognizes the license by name. Even musicians have been finding new ways to sell merchandise bundles and inflate the prices and availability of tickets, much to the dismay of casual concert goers. Most fans of these mediums, though, have either grown jaded and hegemonized by the practice, or have had their voices dwarfed by big box office numbers, Billboard charts, and the silent approval of the general populace. But for gaming, the publisher's desire to make a profit has been a more controversial and stringent topic than in other mediums. This is in large part because of the recent growth of the video game market and the increased mainstream appeal of video games as a whole. Whereas fans of comics, movies, and the like have had decades of businesses turning their favorite series into poorly crafted, general market-focused products, fans of video games have only seen this trend develop in the last few years, as gaming continues to escape the societal stigma of a hobby built for children and middle-aged men who live in their mother's basement. What trend am I referring to? Well, the main element in video game culture that's turning it into a more corporate and profit-based medium comes from DLC. Yes, DLC content such as season passes, deluxe editions, and the dreaded microtransactions. These objects have become notorious as anti-consumer business items in AAA gaming, and it's becoming more obvious now than ever that DLC culture is being put in place as a means to rip money out of the players' wallets. Before we get into the conversation on game culture, let me veer back a little and explain what AAA gaming means. Game series that are backed by notable multi-million-dollar publishers like EA or Activision are what many would refer to as AAA. But that's not the only aspect in the moniker. AAA games are those that are propped up to be iconic. As video games become more of a popular medium, and video game franchises start to become as recognizable as Superman or Mickey Mouse, publishers try to take advantage of the power of brand recognition and in turn create a near monopolization of the market. This market stranglehold is where DLC trend begins. It essentially forces users to be complacent with any way that publishers want to price gouge for a product because they're the only place in town selling. In simpler terms, this is the economic privilege of AAA gaming, the ability to ask for more without drawing your audience away. The controversy doesn't arise from these practices particularly. Instead, they arise from the way in which publishers enact these practices. Just as fans of video games are new to the trend of publishers asking them for more money after their initial purchase, publishers are new to the practice of asking. The publisher's inexperience and lack of cunning approach to this is how outrage ensues. Corporations like Activision, Capcom, and Ubisoft will advertise season passes for Assassin's Creed, Destiny, and Marvel vs. Capcom games well before the initial launch, giving the impression that the publishers don't care enough about the vanilla package to have you be satisfied with that, or worse, that they took away content from the initial game just to turn a profit. These publishers are more brazen with their desire to make the most profit off of their game franchise, and that's where a lot of the controversy seems to be drawn. Instead of subtly adding in features for free and giving incentive to purchase optional, cosmetic, or non-intrusive add-ons, many game publishers seem to hound on the wallets of consumers by constantly reminding us of season passes, map packs, story expansions, and most importantly, in-game currency and microtransactions. Microtransactions, for those who don't know, are the practice of allowing players to purchase smaller in-game items using real money. The practice began in the mobile game market, where free titles would constantly egg players on with optional purchases to speed up progression, play without advertisements, or remove paywalls that made it nearly impossible to continue playing without a fee. The practice was actually first adapted and popularized in the mainstream gaming market by free online multiplayer-focused PC games like League of Legends and Hearthstone, in which players could use real currency to buy randomly generated loot boxes, card packs, and individual characters without needing to buy the initial $60 fee that most AAA games require. Publishers of big cinematic game titles soon began to take notice of both the mobile and PC market's practices. They understood how loot box-based microtransactions appealed to a player's addictive desire to gamble against a random number-generated system, like a patron at Vegas with thousands to spare. They also learned that not all people had enough time to grind through several levels in a game in order to get the best items and gear, so they'd rather pay to reach that status instead. This has led to AAA publishers adding these practices into their fully priced games. Overwatch lets you purchase random loot boxes to get cosmetic items. NBA 2K18 lets you buy virtual currency, which allows you to level up and customize your character. Even the upcoming title Shadow of War, a purely single-player game, lets you buy loot boxes to get premium items and allies. Actually, the list of titles that have implemented microtransaction systems are nearly endless in AAA gaming. Dead Space 3, Evolve, Killing Floor 2, Destiny 2, Call of Duty, Battlefield, Mass Effect, FIFA, Grand Theft Auto. You get the point. Nowadays, microtransactions are virtually unavoidable, and some of the abrasive ways in which they're being forced down consumers' throats are starting to piss them off. The pervasive practice can be overwhelming for many who just want to sit down and play a game without having fears of being obligated to buy additional features in order to fully enjoy their experience. It's because of this practice that animosity has ensued. The saddest thing about all of this, though, is that it's just a trend of the times. Microtransactions aren't the first way in which publishers have worked against the better interests of their consumers in order to turn a profit, and they certainly won't be the last. Does anybody remember online passcodes? Those were those one-time use slips of paper that unlocked all of the online features to a game. They were the main way that publishers would disincentivize people from buying their games used, essentially stating that if you loaned the title from a friend or bought it secondhand, you wouldn't be able to access the game's key features. What about when Street Fighter games forced you to buy a full $60 title for balance updates and a few extra characters and the enhanced Ultimate editions of the game? Fans had taken issue with those practices too, and companies who had done them faced massive backlash. Publishers overreached and enacted those ideas in ways that were outright burdensome to the consumer, so things like online passcodes were ultimately just terminated. Nowadays, microtransactions are just the changing face of anti-consumer business. While most are harmless cash grabs now, it only takes one publisher with enough power to overreach their desire to profit before all of them begin to force people to pay for progression in their game, lest they suffer through dozens of hours of tedious grinding. Despite how bleak the changing landscape of the video game market has become, there's one important thing to keep in mind. You are ultimately the decider in this all. It kind of sounds cheesy, but you have the ability to determine whether or not you want to support these practices. Because of the pervasive nature of these companies and the monopoly they hold on our favorite genres and licenses, it can sometimes be hard to remember that we can just spend our money elsewhere. With the bustle and boom of the indie video game market and the plethora of options at our disposal, it's easier than ever for consumers to vote with their wallets. The crowdfunded indie Friday the 13th game is a good example of a quality product that continues to be consumer-friendly in its delivery, giving its players free updates constantly with the promise of long continued support on the way. Even other indie titles like Cuphead, Rime, and Tacoma, among others, offer new ways for players to find refuge from the headache that DLC culture brings to gaming. Overall, the only way in which people can fight the overreach of things like microtransactions is by staying aware and knowing when not to support a company or product. As much as I want to shout to the hills preaching that we have the power to tell these companies that we don't want things like microtransactions in our games, we don't have that power. This wouldn't be such a widespread epidemic in gaming if some people weren't buying, and there's no saying how far greed will take these publishers in overcharging for titles. Ultimately, you or I can't determine if these practices will change for better or worse, but at least we can stay informed.